So, in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 13, which is the last chapter in the book of Nehemiah, we see a man who is absolutely crashing out. That man is crashing out. Let me tell you why he's crashing out. He's crashing out because of something that we know very well as Christians. Sometimes we also do, whether it's intentional or unintentional. He is having something called righteous indignation. What is righteous indignation, do you ask? So, righteous indignation is essentially where you believe that what God has spoken to you, whether it's prophetic or a word of wisdom or something, right? You believe that the closeness that you have to God and you doing God's will and you passing on God's message or doing what God has sent you to do now gives you the authority or the right to tell people how to live their lives. Firstly, we need to remember that God, Yahweh, is a God of free will. So even though there are laws in place, even though we have grace and we have salvation and we have things that we know that are against God's will, we still have something called free will. This is what Adam and Eve used when they were in the Garden of Eden. So what happens is that Nehemiah, who is the cupbearer of the Persian king. Cupbearer is like the highest standard. This is following after the Israelites had been exiled to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, and years after that, they were there was a time when Nehemiah got the word from God and the Spirit of God fell upon him. And you would notice that unlike many of the other books in the Bible, the book of Nehemiah is kind of a journal. Then we did this. Then I went there. Then the Lord said this. Then I consulted the Lord. Then I did this. So there's a lot of me doing this, which is good. It's a first-hand account, but it's narrated in the first person singular, where we are understanding this from the person who actually did this, who is Nehemiah. Fast forward, he was receiving a call from God to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall in Jerusalem for his forefathers, right? And what happened in this situation is that he does that and he gets favor from the Persian king to say, okay, these are all of the resources. We're sending them in. You can go and do what you want to do, right? So then what happens is that Nehemiah goes and he experiences opposition from the people who are already back in Jerusalem and who are now serving other gods and who are doing their own thing, you know. And then what happens is that when Nehemiah finally concludes this mission from God with the people of Israel, he then leaves everything. He leaves the everything in the temple, everything, and he puts in the law again, you know, so that people can then go back to observing the law of Moses that had led them astray to begin with when they stopped observing it. So this is the reason why God had actually put them in exile to begin with, because they were no longer observing the laws. Everything was great. Nehemiah goes back to Persia. When Nehemiah comes back, right? When he comes back, he finds everything upside down. People are marrying, amongst many other things, people are marrying daughters that are from other nations. They are not observing the Sabbath. They are literally trading on the day of the Sabbath. So there was a guy by the name of Tobias who was technically an enemy of Israel, who was now living in the inner quarters of this structure that was made for all of the resources. They were not giving their tithings to the priests and so on. So you get how everything was spiraling back to the human nature issue that was the reason why they were sent into exile to begin with. But here's what happens then. In his fit of rage, he comes and he throws this guy out and he puts back all of the resources that were supposed to be in the storeroom, and he pulls these women by the hair that were not supposed to be marrying the Israelites and so on. And it's icky. And the reason why it becomes a point of contention is that another person will be saying, okay, well, this guy is well within his right because he was sent by God to do X, Y, and Z, right? However, if we look at it from the perspective of somebody who is just a human being too, you may also believe that if I do good and I preach the gospel, and for some odd reason somebody decides, oh, I'm not going to respect the gospel anymore, or I'm not going to live like the Christian that I say I am, then it means that I get the authority to pull them by the hair. Sounds a little bit extreme, but it's an example where you are looking at somebody who believes that because they are listening to God fully, which is what everybody's supposed to do, but that they feel as though they can override the free will of others. We're not saying that when the people turned away from what Nehemiah had reinstated, it was a good thing. It wasn't, because essentially they were turning away from God's ways and God's will and what God had initially wanted for Israel. So that's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that we need to tread carefully. We need to tread carefully as Christians when we are looking at things from the lens of righteous indignation. Oh no, they're not doing this. Oh no, they're not doing that. The Bible instructs us to correct others, right? It does instruct us to correct others. But the thing with righteous indignation is that we can take it too far. We can use our flesh. And the Bible also tells us to not be quickly angered, to not act without thinking, to not be like fools. The Bible, all around the Bible, it tells us that we need to have a certain level of self-control. So if something is beyond you and you have done everything that God has instructed you to do, and you have obeyed, and you have encouraged others to obey, and you're sharing the gospel and they do not, the best thing to do is to take it back to God.